Music has been something that's very central in my life. I got into playing in bands in high school as well. In college, I started a few bands, and one of them I ended up playing professionally with for some time, and we toured around the US. And at our peak, I think our largest show, we played for an audience of a few thousand people at this venue called the Electric Factory. So I think a lot of my motivation for playing music had to do with that same thread, which was when you have thousands of people or even like tens of people. My first shows were at this little tiny bar on UPenn campus called Smoky Joe's. I think it fit like 100 people or something. But when that place is packed and they're cheering for you, you feel like, wow, so accepted, so affirmed, so respected. But what I realized is like with each greater shot of affirmation that you get from something like that, there's a lower low that comes afterwards. And so I kind of realized what's happening for people who are searching after things like money or acceptance, relationships, or sex or whatever, these outside manifestations of things in the world. But really what's driving that behavior is a little squirt of dopamine or some neurotransmitter in your brain. So you get a little bit of it and you're like, it feels good. So you're like, oh, I want more of that. So then, you go after that same behavior and the same behavior. But the thing is, we're adaptive mechanisms. So in the sense that, Arnold Schwarzenegger, when I was into lifting at one point, I was reading his Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, and he said something really interesting, which is if you put a 5 horsepower load on a 3 horsepower motor, it breaks. But if you put a 5 horsepower load on a 3 horsepower person, it becomes a 5 horsepower person. And so we're adaptive mechanisms. That's a beautiful thing because it means we can get stronger, we can learn, we can get smarter. But on the flip side, whatever shot of dopamine that you got the last time, let's say you earned $1 and you get this squirt of dopamine, the next time, if you earn $1, it's not going to be the same squirt of dopamine. You need to earn $1.50 and then $2 and then $5 and so on. I just realized actually what I'm searching after is so meaningless. This thing that I'd wanted my whole life, and I was kind of starting to get it. I was like, this is totally, totally pointless. And so I actually started to get really, really depressed in the midst of all of that. And there was one kind of show in particular where I was looking out at the crowd and I heard this voice. This voice said, "Come home." And I kind of like looked around. I was like, what the heck is that? And I wasn't sure if anybody else had heard it or anything, and they hadn't. But I realized that, first of all, I was very confused because like, what is home for me? I grew up in the Boston area. I moved to Philadelphia for school. By this point, I was playing in a band full time. So we're traveling around the country, literally living out of hotel rooms, very, very homeless in a sense. My parents had moved away from Boston to Korea by that point. So I didn't have family in Boston anymore. And Korea, was definitely not my home. Not only that, but the 3 reasons that I blamed for getting bullied originally were the fact that I was Korean, because that's why I was not part of the community. The fact that I had a different faith, like I was a Protestant versus a Catholic. I mean, they're pretty similar, but that's another reason why I was different from everybody. And that's why I went to this church that was so far away. And then the third thing was just that my parents, they were who they were, and they were immigrants and they didn't know. And so I wanted nothing to do with Korea. I wanted nothing to do with my parents. I wanted nothing to do with my faith for a long time. But when I heard this voice, I realized that home wasn't a physical place. It was a state of mind. And it was actually those 3 things, which I just thrown away for these 10 years when I went into that period of very deep rebellion. So yeah, after that, I moved to Korea and I lived with my parents. I reconciled with them. I'd really been very far from them for those years in between. I started learning the language. I started getting to know Korean folks, started making Korean friends, dating Korean girls. And then I eventually started working there and I started going to church again. And so I slowly started to find my faith and reconcile with all of those elements of my past.